But I would just like to say, I personally love the Deloitte Football Money League because West Ham are in it. And it's one of the only global leagues that West Ham are actually in.
But to be fair, your position in the table in that is not that different to yours.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Yahoo Footballing Weekly with me, author and Yahoo columnist Neil Humphreys.
With me, Yahoo editor Chia Keong, and we have another Spurs fan for a second straight week. We have James with us, first time ever. And before you think that this is going to be a Spurs podcast anymore, James is a well-known Southeast Asia sports business group leader for Deloitte, because lots of insight on the transfer market. Transfer season's coming up. It's almost ending actually. And so we also will talk about the Deloitte Women's Premier League in Singapore and how the companies at least making an effort to join, to bring up local football and support local football.
Yeah, I mean, before James, you speak, that's the only reason you're here. Is the Deloitte part, because I'm not having two Spurs fans 2 weeks in a row. It's only because we're going to talk about a Deloitte Money League later and what Deloitte's doing for Singapore in sports that you're here. But it's good to have you, James. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm a little bit less contentious than Daryl usually. You'll find me a little bit more reasonable and palatable, so, you know.
Oh, you're on the wrong show then. All right, well, let's get straight into it then. We'll start with Spurs. We'll wrap up the FA Cup action quickly. Spurs, of course, won. They defeated Preston. Couple of goals for Son Heung-min. Is he back?
Well, we said that after the Leicester hat-trick, right? And it didn't really play out that way. I don't know what's wrong with him, to be honest. I know recently he's been talking a lot about the mask. The mask affects his ability to play. But even the doctors are saying he doesn't need to wear it anymore, and it's his parents making him wear it.
Typical Asian parents.
I don't know what's going on with that, but I'm hoping that he wakes up, because as a Spurs fan, you're sitting there and you're saying, well, we've got to where we've kind of got to without Son firing on all cylinders, with our defence leaking goals, without Richarlison for a very long time, without Kulusevski for a very long time. If you can get all of them fit and firing, when we have a decent chance of making a run in the second half of the season. But if Son keeps playing the way he's playing, then the best we'll be looking at is Europa.
I mean, I think they're overplaying it a bit in the media. You know, is he back? Is this a comeback? Even with those 2 goals, he's only scored 8 in 27 appearances. Last year, he scored 23 in the league alone, so in the Golden Boot. And I wrote a column for Yahoo at the start of the season. I really, genuinely wanted this to be his year, you know, his Ballon d'Or year. And I don't use those words lightly. The form he was in towards the end of last season was up there with anybody else in world football. And I have personal selfish reasons about this. I believe Son Heung-min is a torchbearer for Singapore. For Singapore Kiasism, for Singapore Kiasu parents, because every time they say cannot make it because of Asian size, because of Asian physique, because of national service, he has the same size as an average Asian. He also goes through national service like Singaporeans. Every typical cliched excuse or obstacle that we throw up about Singaporean footballers, that man has cleared. That's why I want that man to have a good season.
But it's Korean.
Is it too late?
What's that got to do with anything?
Koreans are more than Singapore.
We've already got one Korean playing for Singapore.
That's good.
So now you're even saying we can't even play the Asian card anymore. We've got to play the nationality card now. I believe that there's a different psyche in Singapore compared to South Korea.
Can you get excited about Mitoma then at Brighton as well, flying the Asian flag and getting an education as well, which will please Singapore parents?
Absolutely, but also coming back to Son Heung-min, being serious for a moment, he went through. I know he had a football background. His parents played. I think his uncles played, but he went through the local system. He went through the grassroots system. He put his national service on hold. If there was ever a template for how a Singaporean young footballer could make it, it has to be Son Heung-min. Why are you being cynical?
I mean, you need a parent who is whipping him into shape.
Yeah, I mean, he's not allowed any girlfriend or anything until he retires and all that.
Okay. And do you remember last year when his dad said, no, not good enough, he could get another 10% out of the Son Heung-min. So Son Heung-min, for me, flies the flag for Asia. I really thought this was going to be the closest an Asian footballer would come, being serious for a moment, towards the Ballon d'Or. Hasn't quite happened. He's now heading towards this year. He'll be 31.
31, yeah.
What do you think?
I still think he'll have a revival before the end of the season. I'm hoping he can get another 6 or 7 before the end of the season, pick it up, make it decent for our sake. But it may be that he's just tired. It may be that he's just
think he
jaded,
is.
especially
so.
after the World
Yeah,
Cup and
I think so.
everything. And I think, to your point, his exertions at the end of last season to get there. And it's interesting, the knock-on effect, because I was looking at the Golden Boot and such the other day, and Harry Kane, who for the last couple of years has been master provider and assist king, Premier League this season, he's got 1 assist.
Yeah.
And the reason he's only got 1 assist is because Son's
Son
not
is-
scoring the goals. So who's he assisting in this world, you know?
Yeah.
So it does have an effect on the whole team.
Of course it does. And we made the joke, didn't we, pre-season when they were all throwing up, you know, Conte's super intense drilling training on the back of a season where they arguably overachieved, certainly physically were pushed to their absolute limits with quite a limited squad compared to their rivals. Then he's off to the World Cup. You can't underestimate the pressure, the national pressure applied to
Intense.
Son
Wasn't
Heung-min.
it? You can see him crying after
I
every...
know, as we said before, they have a daily, nightly show dedicated to Son Heung-min in South Korea that shows regular highlights of his weekly exploits. The intense pressure that man is under. Then he had the injury. I mean, his eye socket, for heaven's sake, virtually popped out. Recovering from that, did the whole Phantom of the Opera thing, and now he's back. I think we're being a little bit too, we generally, you know, the football public
Kind
generally,
of.
a little bit too hard. He hasn't stopped. For 12 whole months, he hasn't stopped.
There are plenty of players going through bad patches of form. I mean, Salah, for example,
shocking.
he's scored
We'll
a
get
couple
to
of
him.
he's scored a couple of goals, but at the end of the day, he's also suffering a lag, and he didn't go to the World Cup.
Exactly.
I don't know what his excuse is, other than that he got a new contract and his best friend disappeared,
something.
right? So everyone goes through these patches. It's just this one, usually with Son, the way he goes is he might go 4 or 5 games without scoring, and then he'll score in 6-7 games.
Yeah.
Yep.
He blows very hot and cold. As you say, this season he's only scored in the Premier League in something like 3 matches, I think it is in total, or 2 matches it is in total. So we just haven't seen that moment, you know. But fingers crossed, yeah.
Fingers crossed. Nice segue, though. Get to
Yeah.
your mate. Salah, Liverpool, out of another cup. Their
What's
season is
new?
effectively over,
Yes.
barring a miracle in the Champions League against
Real
Real
Madrid, man. We're
Madrid.
going to beat Real Madrid.
Yeah, that'll happen.
Yeah.
And what's coming? It's coming. I mean, I wrote the piece this week, didn't I? I wrote a piece on Mo Salah. This Mane thing, let it go. Let it go. It's been 9 months already. You know, you're the highest paid player at the club. You're one of the highest paid players in England, if not Europe.
Right.
You got what you wanted. You got the contract. At some point, Mo Salah has got to step up. And your point about Mitoma, wasn't it? Who scored that fantastic goal.
Cool.
As I said in the piece, those are the kind of goals Salah is
Exactly.
paid for. Those
You're
are the kind
absolutely
of
right.
moments that he puts them away. That's gone from his
I think
game.
what disappoints Liverpool fans most is Salah's inability to grab these kinds of games by the throat.
Exactly.
I think we expected the team to struggle more or less, but we had hoped that Salah will pull some rabbit out of the hat, you know, score some last minute winners, you know, to you know, at least because he has done it before. He has done it before, and you know he didn't go to World Cup, so we might thought he might be fresh for this, but you know, since the World Cup finished, he has been nothing short of disappointing.
How much of it is Salah's form affecting the rest of the team versus
the
the
team-
rest of the team
team-
affecting Salah?
yeah.
Because your defense is
true.
porous. I mean, literally leaking goals. And I noticed in the other day in the Liverpool press, people starting to turn on Henderson and Milner and saying that one of the issues is that the press is failing because Henderson and Milner
Right.
just are not up to speed
Yeah.
to do that press. Because you can talk about Mane leaving, and okay, Jota's been injured, Firmino's been injured. I mean, it's similar to Spurs, but you've got Diaz, you've got Gakpo, who was a revelation at the World Cup. There's plenty of talent there.
You've got
still.
Nunes when they can work out what
Yeah.
to do with him.
Which is why we are a bit frustrated when suddenly we were doing pretty well against Brighton, and then suddenly they brought in Henderson and Milner, which we already thought, oh come on, can they last for that last 40 minutes? And it turns out they couldn't hold on. And you know, I mean the thing is that nothing is done on the transfer market. Instead, although we got Gakpo, but you know the midfield wasn't addressed, the defense wasn't addressed. So there's a lot of frustration among the fans that, you know, no one seems to be able to drag Liverpool out of the mess. You know, that we had hoped that somebody like Roy Keane type of player would like bang in winners out of, even if they're playing badly, you know. But you know, it's not happening. The whole team's it's almost like they're waiting for someone to lead them to that kind of eke out wins after wins. But it's not happening.
I would never blame Klopp. To me,
No,
he
obviously not.
has a reservoir of goodwill. However, I was slightly perplexed by that lineup. I didn't understand what he was trying to achieve with that lineup. One of two things. It was a weakened first 11. Is he suggesting that, as you mentioned, the Hendersons, the Milners, they really can't cut it anymore? Or, he's giving the kids a run out? Or is he almost making this, I wouldn't say this, this statement, this act of defiance. This is the best I have. I can't sign anybody. The club's up for sale. Players are not coming in. That's not a team lineup first 11 to me that looks like you're going to win the FA Cup, which realistically is the only trophy you had on offer. I said in a previous column for Yahoo, go for the FA Cup. Give potential buyers a day out at Wembley. Let the Qataris and the Saudis and everybody else see the Copites.
That's another whole kind of words.
I know, that's why I said it. In action at Wembley. Have your day out in the sun. That was a very, very half-baked starting 11. I couldn't work out why.
I mean, if you'd played that 11, if you had Spurs' fixture, right, and you were away at Preston and you played that 11, you'd say, yeah, you're resting, you're playing the youngsters. Yeah. But you're away at a team that's above you in the Premier League and recently hammered you.
And you're like,
so, like you say, it's almost like we're saying either the FA Cup doesn't matter, but then is it because you're trying to resurrect your league, or is it, like you say,
it honestly made no sense to me.
It made no sense.
And they was outplayed twice now against Brighton, comprehensively.
That's horrifying thought, but that's the whole season for you, man.
But hey, Brighton, credit where credit's due. You can buy any player you want out of that lineup. You can even take the manager. Yeah. They don't care.
Brilliant.
They're still,
I'm loving Brighton.
Gone by clockwork, isn't it?
I'm absolutely loving Brighton.
Team of the season.
But that'll get us onto the January transfer window, which I want to get on now because we can start with Liverpool on the January transfer window. Now, as we're recording this, it's just closing, so there may be one or two signings after that. But whatever happens...
Not for Liverpool.
Exactly. I am completely on the side of Liverpool fans with this one. I know Liverpool fans get a bad press for being impatient, lack of gratitude and all this, but on this one I'm with them. We'll get to the Deloitte Money League in a second, but they had more revenue in the last calendar year than Manchester United. They overachieved with that squad. Klopp overachieved with that squad. That was the moment for the Fenway Sports Group to come in and say, right, couple of $100 million, do what you need to do to at least try to remain competitive. It did not happen, and Liverpool fans have every right to be annoyed about that.
True, and I think even Klopp has said before that quadruple chasing season will take a lot out of the team.
Yeah, of course.
And nothing has been done, and I'm also increasingly more. I'm used to be pretty neutral, and I don't want to criticize the owners that much. But increasingly, I found it hard to say that the owners are okay with not doing anything. The team is really in the dumps right now. They can't execute Klopp's tactics to any sort of level that is title chasing or cup chasing standard, and it's very evident to all the fans that you need backup in midfield. At least loan. Even a loan signing of something would do. But there's nothing but all we hear about. Maybe Jude Bellingham in the summer.
You can't keep going on about Jude Bellingham. At this rate, he's not going to Liverpool.
I would say even if Jude Bellingham comes into this kind of lineup, what can he do? I don't think he can be of that.
Well, just before James jumps in, I was just hearing that even Jorginho may possibly switch from Chelsea to Arsenal.
Chelsea
if that goes through, that'll be a strange transfer. But that's the kind of player that could do a job for Liverpool in the stopgap period. Just somebody in that midfield.
It's the job Thiago was supposed to be doing if he wasn't injured all the time, right? But you should be happy you're linked with Jude Bellingham, because I got suckered in on a clickbait on News Now yesterday that Spurs are chasing Bellingham, but it was the younger brother, Joe Bellingham, 17 years old. So you're at least at that level. We're chasing the younger brother.
At this rate, he's got more chance of getting the little brother.
Exactly. By the time Real Madrid have gotten them, whatever. But it's frustrating.
I wanted to ask you, James, more from a business standpoint. You work at Deloitte. I can't work out the business thinking, planning behind where Liverpool are at the moment with Fenway Sports Group. They've got the club in the shop window, but they're not exactly polishing the product, if you like. They're holding back on the cash. What's the thinking?
Well, you've got to look at what makes what makes a team valuable, right? There's a couple of things that make a team valuable. One is fundamentally what in the business world you would call goodwill. It's basically your brand. It's your global recognition, your ability to sell commercial sponsorships to attract that. And there is an element of that is about your players and is about your success. But equally, you can be a big club like Liverpool or Man United. You can go through a couple of fallow years and still retain that. The second thing you have going for you is what are your physical assets. And this is where, for example, Spurs' valuation nearly comes up with Chelsea's valuation because Spurs have a finished stadium, they have a finished training ground, whereas Chelsea still need to put a lot of money into those things, right? And the case with Liverpool,
They're still building.
They're trying to, they've given up on a new stadium. They're trying to increase the size of Anfield. Their training facilities need a little bit of work. So the conclusion I've come to with Fenway, and to some extent Man United, because by the way, Old Trafford is a
Mess.
I was going to say toilet, but you and I said, but there's an element is if we put money in, is the money that we're going to put in going to increase the price that we will get, or is the fact that we are Liverpool and the brand recognition, the brand value that goes with that, going to get us the price we want anyway? And I think they've come to that conclusion that the brand will carry them through.
Which will really antagonise or upset Liverpool fans.
Yeah.
I actually agree with you, James, but I think it's that classic, if you've got a house, you don't want to over-capitalise, right? Where you're going to just be throwing money away knowing it won't add value to your property.
Yeah.
This sounds like the case with Liverpool. Qualification for the Champions League or not, they've got that goodwill in the tank, haven't they? They've got the global support in Asia, Australasia, Africa. Man U and Liverpool are the untouchables when it comes to that global goodwill that you speak of.
That house analogy is a good analogy, right? If your house is in a wonderful location, if it's got a wonderful garden, it's close to the schools, it's brand new, it's got a 99-year freehold on it and all those things, versus am I going to put another 20 grand on updoing the bathroom? Will that help in the cost? You kind of sit there and go, actually, location. I think we're in a buyer's market, right, or seller's market right now. We'll take what we can get.
So stop supporting Liverpool if you want them.
Especially your analogy, especially when Old Trafford is a toilet anyway. So there you go. Now, speaking of somewhere that isn't a toilet, I just want to get your take on Chelsea. Now, as we sit here, Chelsea are possibly spending another £115 million on Enzo Fernandez. This will take their spending since Boehly took over to £450 million. The reason they're rushing this is because they can get through that UEFA loophole that says their spending is spread out over a longer term period because they didn't spend any money for a while because of Abramovich and sanctions and so on and so on. So they're going to rush through this spending before they fall foul of these UEFA loopholes.
Well, anyway. and the new UEFA rule as well, right?
Yes.
So the new UEFA rule that they've been exploiting up to now by having these 6.5, 7-year, 8-year contracts.
Yes.
And then you're basically amortizing. So you look at Mudryk, I think we pronounce it Mudryk, right? They took his cost, 89 million, and it's 11 million per year for 8 years. And now UEFA's coming in and saying, going forward, for the English rules, that will still work. But for the UEFA rules going forward, no matter how long the contract is, it's 5 years, full stop. And that would change the numbers for them. So they've got one eye on that as well. But when you consider, I mean, we'll see what happens, but they're also going for Caicedo.
Yep, Caicedo.
At 70 million. And they're not really balancing the books. I mean, they're talking about Ziyech going out, but what will you get for Ziyech?
Yeah.
10 million, maybe? Gallagher for 40 million going out. Jorginho, I mean, you'd be lucky to get 10 million. He's out of contract relatively soon. They're not even trying to balance the books. But
Even if you don't talk about financial stuff, how is Graham Potter gonna get the team together? Yeah, I have no idea how they, in the football sense, they're gonna get so many new players in and then expect them to mount a charge from 10 to 4th.
I don't think it's about the season, because when I look at the signings, you sit there and with the exception of this Mudryk, right? With the exception of him and João Felix, who is arguable whether or not he's going to have any impact in his short loan. The rest of them, when you look at Santos and Fofana and Umdeke and all these guys, and to some extent even Fernandez, I don't think the impact this season is going to propel them anywhere. He's almost, when you used to play Championship Manager, now when you play Football Manager, on the one hand, you stack your first team, and then you go out and you find all the wonder kids, and you put them in your reserve team, and then you see which... He's almost doing that. He's stacking a reserve team, which is funny because the old Chelsea way used to be They bring these youngsters through, and then at any moment of time, they have 25 of them out on loan
That's
wherever
right.
they're out on their loan. But suddenly they're paying, and they would sell them for 20 million. They used to balance the books by bringing in a 60 million signing. Man City are the same. And you say, well, how have they balanced the books? And then you see 4 youngsters have gone out that you've never heard of for 15 million. Now they're bringing in the youngsters for 30 million.
And
It just doesn't add up. And they still haven't got rid of Aubameyang and some of the other deadwood. It's really bizarre. But I can't work it out.
Nor can I. And even if you take a step back and just take a whole view of this thing, I actually find Chelsea spending obscene. Just generally obscene. We're talking about a global cost of living crisis here, supply chain issues, rising inflation across the world, and they are spending obscene amounts of money on young kids, 115 million, potentially breaking the British transfer record. All it will do will further widen that chasm between the English Premier League and the rest of the world. And what will that do? That will just make more panic-stricken Italian and Spanish clubs go, European Super League, European Super League, European Super League. It's the only way we're going to be able to compete with the might of the EPL, and nobody wants that. But all this is doing is pulling the EPL further and further away from everybody else.
which brings us to the Deloitte Football Money League. There are
Yes.
top 11 EPL teams in the top 20.
Yep, 16 in the top 30.
16 in the
and it's incredible. You know, you expect to see the Man Uniteds, the Man Cities, Chelsea, Arsenal, Spurs, Liverpool, that. And then you look at number 18 and you've got Leeds. And you
And
got
15 West Ham. I nearly fell off my chair.
But and traditionally it was because the broadcast revenues and the Premier League is the only deal that continues to keep going up in value time after time, and that has a factor. But what we're seeing now as well is what propelled Manchester City to the top is their commercials. Now you can argue all they want about whether or not Manchester City's commercial deals bear any resemblance to the reality of what's happening
there
out
is
there
that.
in the market. But Leeds's commercial deals are pulling through. And you sit there and you take the 11 out of the 20, and then you look beyond that. I think you've got 3 from Spain, 3 from Italy, 2 from Germany, 1 from France.
Yeah.
And that's it.
That's it, yeah.
And I could tell you, I would, if I'm a betting man, I would tell you within 3 to 4 years from now, you will reach a point where if it's the right 20 teams in the Premier League, all 20 will be in the top 30.
Wow.
Yeah.
It will get to that point. The only issue is whether someone comes up on a bit of a wing and a prayer. But it will get to that point. And then to your point, how do other people compete? Yeah.
Well, there's another step. I mean, again, you're well placed to talk about this, James. But when I read that Deloitte Money League, the big issues are who can then buy the clubs? Because you're pricing out, well, British owners, forget it. For the most part, British owners are out of the equation. American owners, the odd Todd Bowley aside, very few consortiums can come up with the kind of money needed. We're talking billions now.
And consortiums.
Yes.
No, you're saying, not individual owners.
No, I'm not even talking
already,
individuals anymore. I'm already saying we're almost moving beyond your basic American consortium. Hundreds of millions and now becoming billions plus. Then you're back again to the Middle East, and there's only a finite number of potential buyers or suitors for these clubs. So is there a risk at some point of this thing imploding? You'll say, no, of course not. There'll always be the revenue. There'll always be the interest. Yes, there will. But can we keep buying 100 million, 150 million plus players forever? At some point, does this bubble burst?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk there about America and the Middle East and all that, because you go back a few years, it was Russia.
Yeah, well, they're gone.
And then it was
Gone.
China.
Gone.
So Russia have gone, China have gone, because
Correct.
they're not allowed capital flight and all that. They're not allowed
Correct.
to live. And you kind of look around the world, and anywhere else in the world, there might be one person here, one person there. But like you say, you pretty much come down to a point of you're looking at the Middle East. Forget Africa, forget South America. The US, they may have other fish to fry, right? And even when you look at someone like Fenway, they make their money effectively out of buying a US sports team relatively cheap.
And then
Price gets inflated. You know, you look at the Major League Baseball teams and the NFL teams were going for a couple of $100 million a few years ago. Now they're in the billions, right?
Yep.
And they've turned that money around. But even you look at the Glazers, they were owning Tampa Bay and other teams, and yet they had to hock themselves into debt to even get into Man United
And that was then.
at that point. There is one British hope on the horizon, which is Jim Ratcliffe.
Yes.
You know, looking at Manchester United. But for the most part, firstly, the Premier League teams and the Premier League are going to have to accept that they may be getting into bed in the next couple of years with some people that maybe are not the people that they should be getting into bed with. And that's going one way. But the other thing that's going to become a problem, and we saw this when there was the talk about the Qatar investment in Tottenham, is the rules prohibit you from having a majority share in teams that are in the same competitions. So the QSI, the Qatari Sports Investment that own PSG, cannot own a team that is going to compete in the Champions League. So they can't buy a majority stake in Tottenham, Manchester United, Liverpool without giving up PSG. So they're selling a minority stake in PSG. It's rumored to be 5, 10, 15%. And by the way, they bought that club for peanuts and it's now valued at something like 20 times what they paid for it. And they're talking about 15, 20% in Spurs because they can't buy 100% of Spurs without giving up PSG. So the pool of owners is going to become very, very limited because as wealthy as people in Qatar are, when your price range is 4 billion, 5 billion, that's really only government.
Right.
That's QSI. That's not individuals at that price point.
And that's only going to potentially add to the panic, isn't it? Because if you're a Qatari owner, a Saudi owner, you're going to prioritize, aren't you? And at some point, you're going to think, I like PSG, but they'll never be Liverpool and they'll never be Manchester United or one others. And then you might start pulling more towards the EPL, pulling money, but as you say, it's happening already, potentially pulling money out of French clubs, Spanish clubs, Italian clubs, and the gulf could even potentially get wider, which will only add to the panic of those clubs saying, European Super League, European Super League, it's the only thing that will save us.
But the next question as well is, how many teams can have these golden angel investors at a serious level? And bear in mind, there are plenty of foreign owners of the other Premier League teams and the second division, but they're not putting anything like the money in. But I draw an analogy here when people talk about privatization of the SPL, to bring it back to Singapore. You know, Lion City Sailors looked at it and said, you know what, if we spend a bit of money, we're basically guaranteed to finish in the top 2. And if we finish in the top 2, then we'll be in the Asian Champions League, and there's an opportunity here. Now, this idea that you could privatize the SPL, how will you make money in that model? So if another wealthy individual comes along and says, you know what, if I put money in, I reckon we can knock Albirex out. I can get top 2. But then you need a third person and a fourth person and a fifth person. And there's only so many players and there's only so many sponsors and there's only so many Champions League places and things like that. And you'll get to the same in the Premier League. At the moment, there's 5 or 6 teams that are throwing money and fighting for 4 places. How many more teams? Newcastle have diluted that even more. If you were coming in right now and saying, I've got an idea, I'm going to buy a team and throw money at it and get competitive. So are you taking out Arsenal, Spurs, Chelsea, Man United, Man City, Liverpool, Newcastle? You've already got 7 that are fighting for that. So if somebody came to me today and said, let's go buy Aston Villa, we're going to turn it into a competitor, I would say there's no guarantees anymore. There were guarantees when Abramovich took Chelsea, when Manchester City owners came in. If you threw enough money at it, you could pretty much guarantee you'd get Champions League. With every new owner coming in, that's getting harder. And then those valuations, exactly to your point, do I want to spend that money on PSG or on an English team? Right now, I would take my money and I'd put it in Lyon.
Right.
I'd put it in potentially an Italian team because I'd say, I'm pretty sure if I throw enough money at this, I can get top 4.
Yeah, there's a pathway.
And I'll be Champions League. And it's an underpriced asset right now.
So basically, Liverpool, you're screwed. No one's going to buy you. You're overevaluated.
Spurs as well.
Yeah, Spurs. But I would just like to say, I personally love the Deloitte Football Money League because West Ham are in it. And it's one of the only global leagues that West Ham are actually in.
But to be fair, your position in the table in that is not that different to your
It's a global league. It's a global league. I'm happy to be 15th in a global league. But tell us what you think. Does Liverpool have a bright future? Should they sell? Should they hang on with the Fenway Sports Group? Are West Ham too highly prized? What about the other clubs? Send all your comments and feedback to
Yahoo Southeast Asia on YouTube, Yahoo SG, Yahoo_MY on Twitter, and Yahoo SEA on TikTok.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
I love that, James. Thanks very much. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you all again very soon in part 2 when we talk Singapore football. See you there.